Welcome, everyone. Happy St. Patrick's Day um, for those who celebrate. And on behalf of Western Washington University, I would like to thank Kitsap Bank, now Kitsap and Heritage Bank, for sponsoring this series of financial literacy workshops. Thank you as well to Vibe Coworks for co-hosting this event. And in particular, we are grateful to Tony George, outgoing president and COO of Kitsap Bank, for inspiring this series. Tony is a Western Washington University alum. He's a former foundation board member and a lifelong Kitsap Peninsula resident. And I'd like to invite him to say a few words and introduce our speaker. Welcome, Tony.
Thanks, Carrie. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for attending this Kitsap Bank Financial Literacy Speaker Series event. My name is Tony. As Carrie said, I was most recently the president and chief operating officer at Kitsap Bank, which was acquired by Heritage Bank earlier this year. Kitsap and Heritage Bank are proud to be sponsoring these financial literacy speaker series alongside of Western Washington University and Vibe Coworks. I have the distinct pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Christy Johnson. Christy is someone who I've had the pleasure of serving with on the board of the Foundation for Western Washington University and alumni for a number of years. And given her broad background of experience, which I'll briefly summarize, I know her presentation will be well worth your time. Christy Johnson is an entrepreneur, board member, and educator. She is currently involved in growing her fourth startup, Artemis Connection, and coaching entrepreneurs at Stanford Graduate School of Business. She is also adjunct faculty at the University of Washington, where she teaches entrepreneurship, business policy, and strategy. She has years of experience working in the corporate strategy field, including a number of years at McKinsey Company. Before her corporate experience, Christy was an award-winning economics and mathematics teacher. In 2005, Junior Achievement recognized Christy as its National Teacher of the Year. Christy believes economics, personal finance, and wealth are very personal and critically important. She has cared deeply about personal finance education, given her experience growing up in a rural and economically depressed part of Washington state. During her over 20 years as a board member for the Washington Council on Economics and Financial Education, she has advocated for all students to have access to personal finance education. Christy holds an MBA from Stanford's Graduate School of Business with a certificate in public management. She also has a master's in education from Stanford's School of Education. And probably most importantly, emphasis mine, is her undergraduate degree in economics from Western Washington University. Go Vikings. Christy resides in Mukilteo with her husband Kyle and her daughter and twin boys. Welcome, Christy.
Thank you. Well, it's great to be here. And thanks for letting me join and talk about a concept that's very near and dear to my heart. So I'm going to share my screen, and feel free to use the Q&A throughout as well. We'll keep an eye on that and make sure that we answer some of the great questions that you have. I can't believe it's St. Patrick's Day. It feels appropriate, right? My twins, they're 12 now. They just turned 12, so they're outgrowing the days where they're expecting gold coins to show up, and hope that maybe they can see the leprechaun. But that feels timely given what we're talking about today, which is financial confidence for all of us, and how do we close the wealth gap? We don't need, a leprechaun or some gold coins to fall out of the sky to really make a difference here. So, kind of this question just to warm you up. Curious how many of you think you'll be the primary financial decision maker for your household at some point in your life? And the fun part about these webinars is I have no idea how old you are. I don't have any idea where you're coming in from. We just kind of want to get a sense and encourage you to think about that question. And the reality is the vast majority of us are going to end up being the primary financial decision maker for our household at some point in our life. And this does tend to hit women a little bit more just because we tend to live a bit longer. And so the vast majority of women actually end up ending their life if they are married, widowed, and so are going to have to be making some decisions. And I kind of want to open with a tale of two graduates. I'm so grateful for my education at Western. And, I came from a small town in Northwest Washington. And because of some financial challenges that my family ended up and going through, I had kind of no options actually when I graduated other than to get a job the Monday after I finished high school. And I worked at a bank, not Kitsap, but I was a bank teller. And then to live at home and go to Western. And I'm so grateful that I did, because I contrast that with some additional people that I graduated with. And for, again, reasons kind of very different and dependent on the family they were born into, maybe had to go right into the workforce or had to go into a university and take on a bunch of student loans. But over time, those decisions that get made at pivotal moments, like when we graduate from high school, or if we go on to university, when we graduate from university, can play out very differently in terms of the amount of student loans that we take on, maybe first jobs that we take, and if we have access to any sort of retirement plan, and also kind of social capital that we end up building that ends up coming into different opportunities. For me, I was super lucky. The economics department at Western's amazing. They're incredible professors that go there, because Bellingham is one of the best cities in the world for professors and also for people to retire. And I was introduced to personal finance at a very young age and made some decisions about what to do with my earnings as a bank teller. And now I've reached a point where, I haven't made hundreds of thousands of dollars. I think as a public school teacher, I made $24,000 when I was first starting out. But because intentionally making some small decisions to invest, you can see a very different kind of retirement option that'll end up being open. Although, as my kids say, I'll probably never retire. I love what I get to do. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the facts here. We're going to explore like what the wealth gap really is, how this develops over the decades of our life, why hard work alone is not enough. And then we're going to wrap with kind of what can policy institutions or individuals do to close it? Because the reality is all of us have more power than we think. And we're in this really unique moment in time where we're going to see a transfer of wealth, where some things could be done if we wanted to really close out that gap. Okay, so just curious, and just think in your own head, what was your earliest memory of money? Let's see what comes up for you. For those of you that might have young people in your life, children form ideas of money, wealth around age 8, and parents are more likely to talk to their kids about topics I won't say on this webinar than they are about money or wealth. It makes people very uncomfortable, especially in the Pacific Northwest. And so think about your own earliest memory of money. And if you have some young people in your life, ask them what those sorts of memories are. It can be a good way to think about that. And then there's usually something really emotional that ends up coming up for us as we think about money as well, right? It might have been scarce. Maybe some of us didn't have a lot of extra. It might have been abundant. It might have been something your family didn't talk about. It might have been, a favorite relative that always had $1 or something for you. So kind of just think through what those memories are. And then there's usually some sort of emotion that ends up being there as well. So this is just me. Tony said all this, again, super lucky. I think this concept of kind of skills, luck, and timing is definitely one it's important to think about as well. But I certainly was very fortunate and had great timing given some of the incredible professors that were at Western when I was there. Okay, then I'll drop this in the chat. And so if you want to, or you can just actually go to the Menti and put this code in, this 43512959. What sort of lessons, either intentional or unintentional, did you learn from your family or your neighbors about money when you were growing up? Let's give you a couple minutes to think about that. Yeah. Kind of, some of this might be fun memories, some of this might be hard memories. I can see some people in the Menti. I'll give you a little bit of time to type. And part of what I want to encourage you to do is just bring up the topic and start to have some conversations. As we're going to look here in just a second, different phases of life have different financial challenges that come into play, and also some opportunities. And so if you can get people talking about it and kind of normalize it's okay to have conversations, because at the end of the day, money's just, a store of value, right? It's just a tool. And it's too bad that we don't talk about it a little bit more. All right, see some coming up. There you go. We're warming up some. Let's take a look here. Okay, so have a rainy day fund. Yeah, I mean, this is often what ends up happening. And that's why I think it's so important to talk through, right? These patterns get passed down on what do we talk about? What don't we talk about? Do we save? Do we spend? Do we work hard? Can be lost in minutes. It's okay to talk about. And now, because maybe it wasn't when you were growing up. Okay. So all these things are really good to be paying attention to. So kind of what's the wealth gap? I mentioned it a few times here, and then why should we care about it? So let's take a look at this. It's different than income inequality. So the wealth gap and wealth inequality is very different than income inequality. I have the great joy of getting to work with young people at the University of Washington and at Stanford. And there's a study that came out last year, and the Gen Z thought that they needed $560,000 in salary in order to have a good life. I was like, wow, where did that number come from? So you look at census data, and you can do this actually. You can look at census data for your zip code, and you can see what the median household income is. You can see what the top 5% is. That's a lot. $565,000 is a lot of money. And that's your income that's coming in. Wealth is different. Wealth would be your assets, your retirement savings. Maybe you have investments in real estate. So it's all those other things that you have working for you. And you can get your money to work for you, which is where kind of wealth inequality can come into play. And it's, people rarely talk about how much money they make, and they certainly don't talk about how much wealth that they may have that's created. But there's this pattern that's been popping up, especially in the last 5 to 10 years, where in really stressed out careers, people will spend the upper end of their income. So even if you have income inequality, there's probably also some wealth inequality that's in there. And even people who are making an awful lot of money might be spending all of it and not investing it into some sort of wealth. So again, want to separate the two. Income and wealth are different, and they're not the same thing. So kind of when we think about wealth and why is this such an important topic to talk about, it pays for things like our first house. And then for those of you in Washington State, I think it's like over $1 million. The average age is 41 now to own a home for the first time. It's because you need some wealth to have a down payment for a home. It might pay for graduate school. It might be something people use to launch businesses. Unfortunately, medical emergencies can come into play. You might have some unexpected health bills. Elder care, which is going to hit us really hard as we see people kind of hit those aging years and our infrastructure might not be able to fully support it. And then generational opportunities. And so you'll hear these stories, and some of you may have these friends, or some of you may be these people where, grandparents or an aunt or an uncle or somebody saved money for a down payment on the house or for graduate school for family members. So wealth is kind of assets that are accumulated that can be used to invest in future things like what's listed here. Now, what's happened, and I know there's a lot of facts on these slides. If any of you know McKinsey, you got to have some dense slides, and you can't take the PowerPoint out of the girl. But we've seen the wealth gap continue to widen. And in fact, it's the widest it's ever been since it started being tracked. And there's some belief that this is probably the biggest gap that we've seen in hundreds of years. So it's happened with both individuals. The top 1% of individuals hold more of the wealth. It's also happened with corporations. The top 1% of companies hold more of the wealth. Well, what does that mean? It means that then they can invest in those things that we looked on the previous page. So houses, real estate, starting businesses, passing it down to their family member. And It's big numbers that we're talking about. So even if we have these big numbers, it doesn't mean that we're automatically distributing that equally. This other piece is, throughout time in history, when the gap has widened, there's usually been quite a bit of unrest that ends up happening. You can think French Revolution. It's kind of a depressing webinar. I promise that we'll get to more of what it is that you are able to do. And then there's some things around kind of what's happened to the bottom 50%, and do they feel like they can be engaged, and that there's opportunity for them, because having access to opportunity, I think, is something all of us want people to feel they have. And then you can see what's happened kind of with the bottom 50% as well. So again, it's not just about the money. The money is a tool and a store of value, but it's also about giving options, having some stability, and also having some dignity. And I have lots of stats that I can include if you want to message me. I'm happy to send you more of this. Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis has quite a bit of this information as well. Okay, so what does this mean over our life, and where can we actually try to do something about it? Okay, so again, you can go like to the chat, or I'll put another question up here. What was your first job? What did people do for first jobs? I'm always so curious. And there are some generational differences that are here. And the ones, babysitting. I bet there's some other people that had that one listed. So there is some data that kind of folks, there you go. Yeah. Kind of under 25 haven't had as much work experience. Part of this has been it's gotten a lot more competitive to get into college. And so as extracurriculars, advanced classes have been picking up, that's come at the cost of some of this working. I mean, if any of you tried to get a babysitter, my goodness, that's paying a lot more than the $2 an hour I used to make. Stocking milk, retail sales. Okay, great. So kind of thinking through that first job, that is a really important moment. Quick story, the delivering newspapers, I love it, right? So there was the treasurer for Washington State was wanting financial literacy to be a graduation requirement. And so a bunch of students actually showed up to testify to the legislator about how important this was. And there's many of them were incredibly articulate, but one was talking about, she's investigated and broken down the crucible in her English class, and she knows how to calculate molecules and balance equations. And she's even looked at theater and kind of what safety regulations if you're going to have a stage. But she got her first job because she was getting ready to go to college, and she didn't know what a W-2 was. And so that's a moment where any of you who have, folks in your life that are getting their first job, this can be a chance to start to talk to them about closing the wealth gap, saving for retirement, some of those things that can really matter. So just wanted to kind of think through those moments where you might be able to have a conversation where normalize it's okay to talk about. And then let's think through early mistakes that you made. So I'm gonna give you just a couple of these that tend to show up. So if you're in your 20s, I'm gonna make sure I'm closing all my toolbars so I can see my slides. Tuition and debt. So student loans, this has gotten to be a much bigger thing. When I was at Western, I feel so old. It was the situation where I could work my bank teller job and some extra house sitting and babysitting, and I could pay tuition. And we moved a couple years ago, and I found an old credit card bill, and I was like, yep, it was books and tuition, and maybe I went and bought a sandwich. 3 things on my credit card statement. The cost of post-secondary has increased significantly. So that is one thing that can either increase wealth or maybe decrease it. This piece on early career. So, and this is something I think all of us can do if we have a job, if we have a young person in our life, those first jobs matter a lot. And I loved seeing some of the examples on the previous slide about delivering newspapers, stocking milk, retail jobs. Those actually teach some really good skills on showing up, being dependable, kind of dealing with the public. So that early career access ends up being really important. Family support. There's lots of students who might have families in other countries they're helping send money to, or they might even actually be helping with mortgage payments. So there's a lot that ends up happening with family support that's often invisible. And then the cost of living, as that's gone up. So that can really drive if people are able to save or not. Oops, sorry, the light went off in the room I'm in. And then this other piece around internship and job opportunities. So that's this moment on, it sets you on a path and introduces you to some careers. And those are things that can be really helpful. So then it's this question of like, well, who can afford to take a lower paying role that builds long-term skills, or maybe who has to take something that's going to pay the bills? I was super lucky that I ended up having a job at a bank and I ended up going into econ and finance, and that was great. I also applied for jobs in restaurants, all great jobs, right? Would have paid the bills, probably would have made more in tips, but it might not have set me up on the trajectory that I ended up being on. And then, there's lots of opportunities that show up maybe in the startup world or in the nonprofit world that are unpaid. And so that's an opportunity to think through, oh, who has access to those and then who maybe can't because they have other responsibilities that they need to take care of. And then this piece, like, well, what could be done? There's some policy choices on debt-free pathways, paid internships, if any of you are in the position to offer them, really trying to make sure young people are getting something for it, either credit or money. Apprenticeship models, so we are seeing more of that happen in our state. And then some starter savings subsidies, affordable housing near jobs. So there's a lot of things that can happen here, both at the employer level, but also at the policy level. And the 20s are really important years, which I would not go back to because they're kind of stressful, but you're trying to figure out like, what does all of this mean? And who am I as an adult? Then you move into your 30s. Well, what happens here? You might be buying your first home, and like, what's the interest rate? That's the timing part. You can't control that. How much are you able to put down? You might be getting into some sort of partnership or relationships. You might have dual incomes. If you choose to have children, childcare costs, the state actually has a childcare desert. So it's very expensive. It's more than my mortgage when I first put my daughter in childcare. And then you might start to see your career either accelerate or stagnate. So these are things that can be drivers. And then this trigger is really around home ownerships. And so do you have somebody, maybe it's parents, maybe it's grandparents, maybe it's other family members who can help with that down payment? And you're going to enter a different wealth track if that's an asset that you're able to include in your portfolio. So what are some things that can be done? Well, there's support for kind of down payment. There might be some things with childcare tax credits or employers thinking through what to do here. I still love, I don't know if any of you have ever been to Patagonia's headquarters. They're down in Ventura, California, but they realized as their workforce entered their 30s that childcare was a major issue. And so they built childcare right on site. They have this like little mountain bike track. So you pull up to their headquarters and there's 3 and 4-year-olds tearing around on these dirt bikes with helmets on, going over jumps. And then that's an option for employees to have some affordable healthcare that's, or childcare that's right there. And then things around student loan forgiveness for parents or caregivers. Sometimes you'll see policy recommendations where people go into fields that are needed, like healthcare or education or the nonprofit sector. There'll be some loan forgiveness. So a lot of this happening in the 30s. And you might start feeling some of that crunch with work and life intersecting at the same time. Okay, so then what happens in your 40s? Well, here's where you probably are in your highest earning years, or you might be starting to plateau. Caregiving, kids and aging parents, you're going to see more of these sandwich generations come into play, and elder care is extremely expensive. And then depending on if your parents have saved, there might be medical bills that are coming into play or additional support that you're having to offer. We are seeing an increase of divorces in 40s and 50s. So like, what does that mean? That can be very costly. And then there's opportunity for entrepreneurship, or maybe you don't feel like you can take some risks. There's actually really good literature that shows people in their 40s do really great starting businesses because they have learned a lot and maybe some wisdom. And as they've hit that career plateau, there might be an opportunity for them to do more. There's also something called entrepreneurship through acquisition, which similarly to this transfer of wealth, we're going to see a transfer of businesses as boomers start retiring. And these are their babies, like what's going to happen to them? So you'll see some pathways where people might have assets or wealth that they can use to acquire a business from a boomer and run it, or maybe they won't be able to. So it's what is that asset base of savings, retirement savings, maybe wealth and real estate that could be used, and then who's financially fragile. So then, well, what can we do about this? There's some care economy supports. There might be reskilling and upskilling that can be done. Small business capital access, small business loans. Your banks can be great at helping you understand what your options are. Incentivizing people to save, and then some portable benefits. So that might be healthcare, that might be retirement plans. And some companies will put in kickers for people to save more for retirement at different ages and phases. We'll say the 40s actually are kind of a good decade. So I'll just throw that out there. Okay, so then what happens in your 50s? Well, you probably are having some home equity, depending on the term and type of mortgage. You may actually have it close to paid off. I saw a beloved professor the other day, and he had this big smile on his face, and he's in his 50s, and he's like, I just paid off my mortgage. And he's like, it's great. Like, you don't realize how much money that is going towards a payment every month. You might also start to see some health expenses come into play. Nobody has any control over what those needs are going to be, and this will depend on the kind of insurance plans that you have. This is probably where your caregiving is going to be some of the heaviest. Again, aging parents, children, maybe a bit of both. And we're certainly seeing folks in their 20s end up back at home a bit more for all the reasons that we looked at earlier, which is very expensive. And then age bias is real in the workplace. And so you're seeing people kind of age out or get laid off at these higher levels. And then what are the options for them afterwards? So that's kind of a bit of what's happening in the 50s. And then it's this question of, well, what are some inequality triggers? And really around, do you keep working or until you want to move on to something else? Or are you forced out because of a layoff or a health issue? And this is where some things around age bias really come into play, thinking about health control, any sort of caregiver credits, and then tax advantages that might let people catch up. And then, 60s plus, right? And what do they say? If you're healthy in your 40s, you're probably going to live to be 100. So this could be a really long time, much longer than what many people have planned for. This is where that retirement savings comes into play. Certain employers do have pension, healthcare, long-term care, any sort of housing stability that ends up being really important. And then you see these inequality triggers where kind of wealth ends up compounding, but also insecurity can end up compounding. And so, having those conversations early on with loved ones can make a really big difference. And you can see some potential solutions on the right-hand side around, what do we do with healthcare? What do we do with Social Security? What do we do with senior housing and medical costs? Nothing that's going to be easy for us to solve in our, hour together, but things to be paying attention to. All right. So hard work, not really enough, right? We love to tell that story in the US, but skills, luck, and timing. There's a lot of things with luck and timing that can make a difference. It's funny. My husband also went to Western. He majored in finance. If sometimes people will call me and they'll be like, Kyle Johnson. I'm like, oh yeah, that's my husband. I took his phone when I was in college. And they still have his number. Unfortunately, we got married since his name pops up. But he graduated, he played football at Western and he redshirted. So he played a 5th year, and that meant he graduated right after 9/11. Terrible time to be graduating. All the jobs dried up while we were trying to figure out what was going on. And fortunately, he had a really good friend he met at Western in one of their first classes. And this guy was working at a fast growing bank called Washington Mutual, and they had an hourly job. And, my husband went there and worked super hard and ended up with this like very surprising career and mortgages that we wouldn't have anticipated. It was timing made it be a terrible market. And there was luck of, he met a really great friend in college that introduced him to an opportunity. So I just really do want to emphasize this piece around hard work and kind of what does that mean with the wealth gap? All right. So kind of what are these forces that it can compound inequality? Timing, which we were just talking about, access. This is where education ends up being so important. And then policy, which some of us might be able to influence. It's really not about blame at all, and we are where we are, but it's designing a system that matches our values where we can make a big difference. Okay, so what can we actually do? And then we'll make sure that we leave lots of time for questions because I bet you all have some. So this theme of like, we all have more power than we think. So funny. I always talk to my students. I was like, I never thought I would be where I am. And I've been so fortunate to have people help. So this on this left-hand side, if any of you have policy roles or are interested in advocating for policy, childcare, parental leave, universal health accounts, tax credits, housing, student debt, portable worker-owned benefits. Those are all things on the policy side that can make a big difference. And I run a small business. I have my absolutely amazing COO going out on mat leave soon with her first. We do 6 months paid maternity and paternity leave because we think that's really important. It is very expensive as a small business to offer, but it is something that's an investment in talent and also lets people create some wealth and while they're also building their families. On the institutional side, this is some of what I was just mentioning with employers have decisions they can make on what they do, emergency funds, offering paid internships or apprenticeship, thinking through tuition-free community college and trade programs. Trades are very important in Washington State. And then any sort of financial coaching that can be tied to benefits. And there's so many free programs that are out there. I just saw actually when I was prepping for this, I guess Capital One and Khan Academy are doing something on financial beginnings. So there's lots that's out there, and it's really just trying to make sure people are getting accurate information. And then for all of us as individuals that are in our communities, what can we do? I spent a lot of time asking you questions in the beginning about first job, money memories. I walked you through some key moments that end up mattering in terms of people being able to build wealth or maybe detract from it. But we can all share valid resources and information, and we can really help, especially first generation students, where maybe their parents or extended family don't necessarily know as much. We're seeing a return to some of these community lending circles and support, and then also a rise of more cooperative or kind of ownership-based models. So there's some ideas of what can be done. And just helping each other out. So in fact, I'm just going to turn this over and kind of crowdsource some of my ideas that you all might have. There's lots of books, there's podcasts, there's writers, there's videos. Ideally, you start with some of the substance because there's lots of influencers where you're probably making them rich by clicking on their links and sharing them. But I thought people that are in this webinar might have some ideas on resources that could be really helpful. So I'm just going to switch my screen and see if you have things that you'd recommend. So you can just share these out. I'll send some post webinar as well, so you can continue to learn from other folks. Again, you want to actually start with like, what do we know works? What do y'all really like? Oh, Morgan's books are really great. Yep, he has Psychology of Money. He's actually in Washington State. I don't know if folks knew that. I think he has another book that came out as well. Wealth of Common Sense, love it. Paul Merriman, absolutely. Western's lucky to have Paul as an alum. Yeah, We're All the Bankers' Yachts. It's a really fun book around kind of following the money and understanding how different companies are structured and where they're making their money from. So I love this, and I'll send out some more that we can send as a follow-up as well. But it is, if you like to learn, it's absolutely an amazing time to learn. There's so much content out there, and it's a bit of discerning what's actually the best and the most helpful, and based in some sort of research, not just an influencer that's trying to make money off of you. So I'm just going to have a bit of a call to action, then we'll open it up for some Q&A. So we all have more power than we think. If you kind of can influence policy, then try to think through that scaffolding in different decades of life. If you're an employer, like how can you be that first rung? And even just defaults of setting people up for retirement. I had a student, I was doing some talk about financial literacy in class and talking about behavioral economics. I was like, some of you might have employers that match. One of my students who worked in retail, he's like, well, I have like $8,000 sitting in a retirement account. I had no idea. And it's like, well, if you forecast that out and don't touch it, like what could that be? So again, there's things employers can do. If you educate, if you're in any sort of K-12 role or post-secondary role, thank you. Hard work. But think about financial fluency as a life skill, and that this lets people achieve their dreams, not something that's, just an elective. If you're a parent, emotional support actually matters a lot as well, as much as financial support, and making it something that's normal and natural and easy for people to talk about. And then if you know students, encourage them ask for help, right? This is long term. It's not like a linear formula that they can pay attention to. And I do think that the more we can tell stories and interact with people and make it a more natural conversation, the more that we're going to be able to help each other out. Okay, and then I think just like we don't just build wealth, there's so much more to this. It's stability. It's ability to have a home if that's something that's important to you. It's dignity. It's being able to, pay for your medical bills or not be stressed about having some sort of needs. And then it's a society where potential isn't determined by your zip code or like the luckiness of the family that you were born into, or maybe the debt that you were born into. It can really be something that allows everyone to have access to opportunity. And I just love to think about like, what would it mean if we could have more people building businesses or investing in their communities, or not having to be stressed about getting access to mental health or, regular preventative care? What kind of society would that end up being for us? Yeah, and I will close it for questions. I'm going to stop sharing so I can at least see. I saw another question come into the chat. Saving for your kids' education. What strategies should you consider? Yeah, this has been, my daughter's a sophomore, which is wild. And it's been an interesting conversation, right? And I think these are all the life moments where like getting your driver's license and then sharing like, hey, you should have insurance, right? As she had this question because college is starting to come up a lot, and she's noticing some of her friends are only considering schools where they think they can either get scholarships or they can live at home, or maybe they're public institutions. 529 plans can be great for saving. There's some things in Washington State that are also really beneficial for saving as well. Happy to get those resources over to you. And then just having conversations with your kids about like, hey, this is a priority to us, education. Like we started investing and tucking aside money for it for a long time. That's also something you can share with additional family members. Small amounts add up. Grandparents, they can give, I don't know. I know how many of you have kids, but it's like, oh, more stuff. Or like put $25 into, college fund when they're 5 or 6, and that can compound over time. But we do have a lot of good options in the state for saving for college as well. All right. What other questions do folks have?
Christy, we have a couple of questions that were submitted through the registration page. I can share those now.
That'd be great, Carrie. Let's go for it.
Awesome. First question is, what are the best practices for families to build healthy habits around money?
Oh, yeah. Healthy habit. I mean, isn't the whole goal of parenting trying to build healthy habits? And I don't feel like you have that much time. So I think this one part would be your kids are forming concepts of money and wealth by about age 8. So if you're not talking to them about it, then it's going to be either what they're talking about with their friends. I'll go back to a story on that, or it might be things that they're seeing on media. And so again, like depending on what they're watching, who knows what their perception might be. It might be that they need $565,000 in order to be happy. So I think early on, normalizing conversations about money and wealth, and whenever they ask a question, even if it makes you maybe a little bit uncomfortable, addressing it. So just to give you an example, my boys were talking about something and they were like, well, this friend who I'm not going to name, he just looks on Zillow at everybody's house prices. And I'm like, what? And they were so much younger than I thought. And there's part of me that's like, don't do that. But I was like, well, that's interesting, right? Like, what did you notice? And guys, do you guys look at Zillow? So again, I think like, don't trigger any shame. If they bring something to you, it's great that they did, and encourage them to talk about it. I think a second thing that can be done on good habits is just starting to talk about values and priorities, because we all have different values and priorities based on our family of origin. And so just sharing kind of what those are. You could also flip it. You could ask your kids like, hey, what do you think our values and priorities are based on where you see our family spend time and money, and see what they come back with. So I think that's another way that can be very normal for them to have this conversation. And I do think a good habit is like just really judgment free. Like we all are making different choices based on what our values and our priorities are. This one nugget I'll throw out, because I'm certainly seeing this at the university right now, is the rise of gambling and predictive markets. And I am finding that I'm like, they have like hundreds of thousands of people trying to make it super, super fun. So you sports bet or bet on what color Gatorade is going to be poured after the Seahawks win the Super Bowl, or who's going to win the Oscars. I mean, you can bet on anything. Is there going to be a streaker at some sporting event? Like, do you know how many people are trying to get you to play that? Like, why do you think they're doing that? How much money do you think they're making? So kind of this concept of following the money and being aware of what it is that's happening. But I think probably most important, encouraging conversation, not triggering questions of shame, even if you're like, oh, that's a question, directly answering only the question they're asking, see where they take it from there, because you want them to keep talking to you. And then pull in expertise whenever you have it. Western has a really great center that I think Eric Worley's leading, thanks to Paul Merriman's gift. And there's some resources that are there. There's a question that just came in about single most impactful change, policy, education, community action, close the wealth gap, and can help individuals contribute to that, making that change happen. Oh, I wish there was a silver bullet. I think transparency is a really good thing. So that's why I try to pull in a bunch of data for all of you. And that's why I like encourage people to go look at the census data. Compensation's the only place where we all feel like we're below average. Otherwise, we think we're all average or above average, right? But then when you actually start to look at the facts, you're like, oh, relative to the rest of the world, like I actually make pretty good money. So I think transparency as much as possible, and getting asking the questions and trying to follow the money. So that's probably one piece. There's probably a policy change around private markets that's important to pay attention to right now. I mean, this probably won't surprise you given I spend so much time in public education. We have phenomenal teachers in the state. I think if we can equip teachers with the skills to bring financial literacy into their schools, and kids like to talk about this stuff, right? And wealth gaps and all of that. We could ensure that all students in the state of Washington at least were introduced to the topic. And then I would say for any of you that maybe have some wealth, just being intentional as you're thinking about transferring that. And again, if you have some transparency into where there are organizations that are actually delivering outcomes and results, not just posting a lot about it, maybe distributing some there. So I give you 3, sorry. But I think there's an awful lot that needs to be done. Carrie, do we have more questions from the registration?
We do. And it kind of extends what you were just talking about. So this is specifically around younger kids, 5 to 7 maybe, and helping them absorb really tactical concepts about saving, compound interest, managing money. Like if you've got ways that you could share that might be helpful.
Yeah, well, and I have the joy of having 3 kids, including twins, which for me, it's helped me realize it's 95% genetics, because I have 2 very different little boys. And so I think in that 5 to 7 range, it's like all those teachable moments that end up happening. So they had these pouches, and one of them had lost his pouch, and he was very concerned that he couldn't find his pouch. And I was like, that's weird. He was maybe 5. They'd just come home from a birthday party. So we find the pouch, and inside the pouch is $90. And I'm like, where did that money come from? And he's like, well, sometimes it's just lying around the house. So I put it in my pouch. And then the other one's like, I don't know where any of my money is. I have no money. I'm like, well, we probably have $45 in that pouch, right? And also like, one of you pays more attention and one doesn't, right? And so like, let's use this as a bit of a teachable moment. There's these, let me just look it up really quickly, because a lot of people have been talking about this. I don't know how many of you know Mr. Beast. Mr. Beast is one of the most famous YouTubers, and young young folks love him. He just bought a financial literacy company. I haven't looked into the details at all. But it would be interesting to see. And his reason why he did that is he felt like he came into tremendous wealth as a YouTuber and a creator that he wasn't expecting, and nobody had equipped him with that. So he wants to do something to pay it forward. Again, I'm not validating that that's a good one, but like it could be something that you bring up with your kids. I'm like, Mr. Beast, this guy you love, did this. I wonder what that's about. Greenlight would be one I hear a lot of parents talking about. It's a money app. I've seen people do something as simple as just like, even a star system. And again, trying to normalize, hey, we go out for dinner. Like, how much do you think dinner was? Oh, wow, like this restaurant does 20% service gratuity. Why do you think they do that for their workers, right? And so, oh, what kind of choices do you think they're making if they guarantee some sort of a payment? So I think just like normalizing the conversations and bringing things that are in their life. Greenlight would be one I know a lot of people like. I've seen people do kind of handmade different jars as well. And what I love about kids is they actually are much more altruistic and curious than we think. So, even we, and again, I'm happy to share this, Carrie, as an exercise. You can take causes, you can like list, we did this when they were younger around, it might be animals, it might be the environment, it might be food, it might be health, it might be kids. Like if we were going to give away a little bit of money as a family or volunteer, like what causes do you care about to start to get them thinking about philanthropy? And then also savings. And you'll have to know your own tendencies. I think all of us maybe skew more saver or spender. And so saying that, right? Like my kids know I'm a saver. And so I'm like, I have a really hard time, splurging, but I decided to splurge on this one thing on vacation because I wanted us to have a great memory, right? And so I think just intentionally talking about some of those sorts of things can make a difference. But there are lots of resources out there. Just try to understand what their fee structure looks like and if they're making money off of you and your kids or not. Ethical investment tools. Yeah, this is a really hot topic right now. It is so hard to untangle as well. So, oh, Eric, I think there might be another question and some follow-up that needs to be done. I would encourage you to keep asking questions though. A lot of these funds, it's hard to disaggregate which actual stocks are in there. So maybe you don't want to invest in oils and gas or ammunition. I don't know. These are all, again, very personal, depending on what your values are. It can take quite a few questions to ask to understand what those are. And you might want to look for funds that kind of opt in or out. The other thing would be if you're investing in venture capital or private equity, just trying to understand who the limited partners are that are investing in there. You can see sovereign wealth funds from certain countries that you may or may not align with their kind of human rights decisions. So again, like follow the money, think about your values, make sure it aligns with what you want. You're probably going to have to ask an awful lot of questions, so in order to understand. And I applaud you for asking that question and thinking about aligning it with your values.
We have one more question. What about Roth IRAs? What would you advise people to think about there?
Yeah, I mean, and it's a trade-off, right? Like there's tax benefits depending on if you want the tax break now, in which case you might want more of a traditional, or if you want it later, in which case you might want a Roth. Lots of tools online. Actually, I think Fidelity and Vanguard have a lot of wonderful online tools. Fidelities have gotten a little bit better. I've heard it's partially because they're in an area that's easier to recruit tech talent, and both of them seem to have an in-office culture. But you can play around with like, if I think I'm going to make this and want this kind of a break, should I do a Roth versus a traditional? And again, it kind of just depends on what you think your income's going to look like over time and kind of what it is that you're optimizing for. Wonderful thing to start saving for. And compounding interest, I think that's like a really easy chart that you can show kids to help if they're learning something like exponents. So 4th or 5th grade, this is one of those teachable moments around the beauty of compounding interest. And again, kids are naturally interested in money. So if you don't normalize it, they're going to be looking in other sources to try to figure it out. And so traditional and Roth IRAs can both be great ways to set up good habits for them as they get that first job and help them save for the future. Really thoughtful questions. Okay, well, I'll hang around for a couple of minutes, but I think this question on wealth, power, money, inequality. Again, wealth, power, money, inherently not good or bad, all in how it's used, depending on what our values are. It is naturally something humans are interested in. Getting more transparency and normalizing talking about it can make a really big difference. And we're in this unprecedented moment in time where we're going to see a transfer of wealth. So there are things that all of us can do, whether we're employers, parents, community members, engaged voters, policymakers, that could make a really big difference. So thank you for letting me spend a little bit of time with you today.
Thank you, Christy. Thank you so much for those insights, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Eric Worley's giving you a shout out in the Q&A as well. And thank you to Western Washington University, and again to Kitsap and Heritage Bank for hosting us, and Vibe Coworks for co-hosting. And we'll be sending out the email with this recording in the next few days, so keep your eye on that in your inbox. And if there are no further questions, doesn't seem like there are, I think we're concluded.
Thank you, everyone.